This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning and afternoon, everyone. I'm coming to you from the National Association for Interpretation in Fort Collins, Colorado. And this is the first webinar in a series of 4 that we'll have that will be focusing on traditionally underrepresented communities. And today we have a group of women-led businesses. Our first webinar is going to be moderated by MARGO CARLOCK. MARGO retired at the end of 2020 as Executive Director of NAI. Prior to her almost 8 years with NAI, she served as Executive Director of the Virginia Association of Museums for 19 years. Before her work in association management, she held several quite different positions in state and federal government as a Foreign Services Officer. She served in Dakar, Senegal, and Warsaw, Poland, in addition to stints in Washington, D.C. For the state of Missouri, she served as Special Projects Coordinator and Legislative Liaison for the Division of Aging and International Marketing Specialist for the Department of Agriculture. She is keeping busy in retirement and as a member of Fort Collins Historical Preservation Commission and as a volunteer mentor counselor for small businesses and nonprofits through the National SCORE Network Services Corps of Retired Executives. And whenever we get the chance, we ask MARGO to help.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Heather. And I'd like to say good morning to everyone as well. We are looking forward to hearing our panelists' experiences as women in leadership roles. Our goal is for attendees to have useful takeaways and valued insights that you can incorporate into your own leadership journeys, and perhaps also inspire you towards entrepreneurship. First, I'd like to briefly introduce our distinguished panel. And just to let you know, we will have at the end of the program the bios and links to the companies in our chat box. We will post that for you all. First, I'd like to welcome Mary Clark, who is the CEO of Agents of Discovery. Mary is a dynamic leader with a passion for creating education technologies that change the world. A visionary entrepreneur who brings a unique perspective to product development, Mary brings years of experience as a teacher and science textbook writer to her executive role. She holds a Bachelor of Science with honors and a Bachelor of Education with a focus on education technology from the University of British Columbia. Mary has been, as well as a Master of Education with a focus on education technology, my apologies, from the University of British Columbia. Mary has been the recipient of numerous awards, including being named to Canada's top 50 women in STEM. I'd like to particularly thank Mary and Agents of Discovery for sponsoring this panel. Thank you, Mary.
Our pleasure. Yes, thank you.
Next up, we have KESHIA Chambers, who is the owner of BLK CLE, Black Cleveland. KESHIA is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. KESHIA is an engineer from Texas with a curiosity for history. And while in Texas, KESHIA grew up celebrating Juneteenth and went to an HBCU, historically Black college or university. Being connected to Black history and culture is very important to her. She moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and wanted to learn about the local African-American history, but it was not readily accessible. So she researched it on her own. And after finding out that many who are native to Cleveland had never heard much of that history, KESHIA was motivated to develop tours and started a company to share the truth about Cleveland's African-American history. Welcome, KESHIA. Next is Dr. Janet LaBreck, who is owner of LaBreck Consulting and co-founder of Synergy Consulting Partners. Janet is a national thought leader committed to results-driven outcomes with strong practical expertise and a passion for helping clients leverage partnerships, manage stakeholders, and design innovative strategies for the public and private sector. In 2013, she was appointed Commissioner of the National Rehabilitation Services Administration, which assists state and other agencies providing vocational rehabilitation services. to individuals with disabilities. Following her tenure as RSA Commissioner, she co-founded Synergy Consulting Partners and Janet LaBreck Consulting. Janet serves on the board of several organizations and institutions and represents the less than 3% of people with disabilities who are successfully self-employed. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you.
Next up is Ann KETZ, CEO and Services Director of the 106 Group. Ann's career in cultural resources interpretation, management, and planning extends over 40 years. Ann has witnessed the field of cultural heritage and interpretive planning change significantly and has been instrumental in its establishment as a vital part of planning. Today, Ann is honored to serve as Vice President for the International Committee on Interpretation and Presentation of Cultural Heritage Sites of the International Council for Monuments and Sites, known as ICOMOS. Since founding the 106 Group in 1992, she has worked with a broad range of stakeholders, including community activists, planners, and Native American leaders. She is skilled at seeking creative solutions to challenging problems and has authored numerous interpretive plans. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you very much.
And finally, but last but not least, certainly, Betty Brennan, founder of Taylor Studios. Betty has been leading the Taylor Studios team since 1991, creating timeless exhibits for museums and nature centers across the country. Over 750 projects in the last 32 years. That's quite an output. As president, she implemented the strategic goals and objectives of the company while giving direction and leadership toward the achievement of the company's philosophy, mission, and strategy, while ensuring the entire organization runs in accordance with Taylor Studios' high standards. She's been recognized by Inc. magazine's Female Founders 100 list in 2020 and regionally famed as an outstanding woman you should know by local media and published in many other resources. Under her leadership, Taylor Studios thrives in the exhibition industry. In December 2021, Betty sold Taylor Studios and stepped down as president in August 2022, but will continue to be an ambassador for Taylor Studios, Inc. Thank you, Betty, and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, let's get right down to it. My first question for the panelists is, why? Why did you decide to start a business? And were there any barriers to entry that you faced when you decided to start a company? Betty, would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah, I had an entrepreneurial mindset. Maybe growing up on a farm helped that, and so always had that ambition. And it's a little bit about control. I get to control my own world and my own destiny. So really wanted to start a business. And I'm sorry, what was the second question? And what?
If there were barriers to entry?
Oh, well,
in other
yeah.
words, what were the barriers to you setting up a business?
Yeah, it's financing, right? And so we bootstrapped it, so it was a slow start. It took many years to grow.
We having technical difficulties?
But bootstrapping your business is a possibility. Did I fade out?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Would you like to repeat that last couple sentences?
I'm just saying that bootstrapping is a possibility that people should consider. It's a viable option, and it's a great way to test the market without going into debt.
Great. Who'd like to speak next? Mary, how about you?
Okay, certainly. Well, I started Agents of Discovery after completing my master's degree, as you were saying, in EdTech at UBC. And the topic of my thesis was using augmented reality games for STEM learning. And I was shocked to discover that although ARGs are very effective in actually changing human behavior, they were being used almost entirely by the entertainment industry. So I set out to change that and try to get them into the hands of people who have a vested interest in getting kids outside and learning about science and history within the context of their communities. So the biggest barrier, as the previous speaker said, was funding. And I was at that time, this is 7 years ago, was very unaware of the difficulty that females face in getting venture capital. So I wish I had been more aware. I think one thing that I could share that would be helpful is currently, and I've tried to find the stats, but it looks like it hasn't changed that much. Women receive less than 2% of venture capital funding, women-led, female CEOs. So we have to be very creative in how we pitch. So I don't want to take too much time, but I can say that it's finding the funding that is the difficult part of starting a business, especially when, 2% is 2%.
All right. Anne, would you like to chip in?
Oh, so similar experiences and driving factors. I just personally, I prefer to lead, not follow. So, and entrepreneurial, there's different ways you can describe that. I also, in my personal situation, my husband and I wanted to work together. That was what he had experienced with his parents and I had with mine. So we sort of had a family tradition of that. So that was something. In terms of barriers, absolutely financing. It's always money, 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 follow the money. But I think one of the challenges in the early days, there was still a tendency for going low bid. Low bidders was the way projects went, and low bid does not necessarily or usually translate to high quality. And so there's that endless tension, which isn't always a negative tension, but there is a tension there of coming up with reasonable value and price on services that our clients want. So I think that's a constant challenge. And the other one for us is just people not really understanding what we did. It wasn't like you could go into a room and say, well, I'm an architect or I'm an engineer. It's like, what's an interpreter? And I even remember going to an NAI session saying, there was one guy stood up and said, my mother doesn't even understand what I do, So some of that was sort of a amusing challenge, but yeah, money, sources of funding, high risk, how much are you going to go into personal debt, such as credit cards and so forth, to be able to make your business grow is really tricky.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anybody else want to address this question? All right, well, let's move on. I have kind of a follow-up. Funding seems to be somewhat of a common theme, let's say. Let me look into that just a little bit more. How did you go about securing funding for your startup? I remember Betty was talking about bootstrapping and your comments. It seems like everybody kind of went about it a little bit differently, taking from your own personal resources and some other things. I'm curious how you went about securing any kind of like loans, particularly any loans that are geared towards small women-owned businesses. Did anyone go that route?
No, I got a small loan in the beginning to buy some computers. But then I wasn't able to get a loan until it was a mortgage. And so then they had, an asset to back it. So it's difficult, right? You've got to make money to be able to get loans and you got to prove yourself. Eventually we were able to get a credit line, but that was after many years of proof and revenue stream and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. We were fortunate in Minnesota that our Department of Transportation had a very active program for new disadvantaged woman-owned businesses where you could get a loan through, it was called the Working Capital Fund. It wasn't huge, but it was specifically for DBE, WBE companies. And so that was really helpful. But then again, I think some of it, I'm sure all of us at some point you take that risk of putting it on your own personal credit card. So you've got to be really confident And also, depending who shares those credit card accounts, be really sure that they're willing to take that risk with you. So it is a big step. It's tricky, but government programs, and I think more and more organizations are becoming aware of this. So I think there is more working capital out there for women-owned businesses and disadvantaged businesses through state programs. It just depends. Some companies don't do government funding. It's more for historic sites and so forth. So it depends how your company's structured and who your primary clients are.
Mhm.
I'd like to add, hi, everybody. I can now see your faces.
Welcome aboard, Keisha.
Thank you, thank you. Listening in the background, of course. So as far, I want to jump back and say, as far as starting a business and kind of the impetus of the why, is really just finding a need. I think we've probably all were just in this space and realized that there was a gap, and we're passionate enough and we're natural leaders enough to want to try to fill that gap. So that was what kind of led me into starting my business. This is Black Cleveland. And what I've been able to do for funding, the first kind of bit of money I got was through a pitch competition. So I entered the pitch competition, made my pitch, got some funding. The second amount, my second kind of batch of money that I was able to receive was I participated in an Accelerate program, Business Accelerator. And at the end of that, there was an opportunity to pitch, and I was able to get some more money. And with doing
Keisha, excuse me for interrupting, but was that through the local, was that through the county or the local small business administration?
So the first one was they're both local programs. One, the Cleveland Leadership Center kind of owns a pitch competition. I'm partnering with one of the local banks, Citizens, if I can get that plug. And then the next was a program called Sea Change. And they have, it's a statewide program, but they have something specific to Cleveland entrepreneurs, and participated in that, and then had the opportunity to pitch and receive some funds. So, talk about bootstrapping, that's kind of like been the way I've just been trying to find these opportunities, but we have some really good local support groups for businesses, and specifically women-owned businesses, kind of like an SBA. They've all been kind of born out of the Small Business Administration, and now they are more specific and targeted towards either women or minorities, which is going to be my next, level of ask, is to start being more engaged in those organizations.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that that a lot of people don't realize, is that there are quite a few little niche programs here and there, and it changes from location to location. So in some cities, it's a city program or a county, or sometimes there's multiple ones. They may not provide a lot of money, but they do. It is worth checking into. And if I could just throw this in, going to the local reference librarian, if you have no idea of where to start at your local library, or if you're near a college, that's a research library. They can usually help you discover what kinds of programs are available in your area. So
in your local SBA.
Yeah.
Yeah, the SBA is really helpful, even just for learning,
right,
to connect with your local SBA.
Right.
And this is Janet. I had similar experiences also. I mean, I think that funding is always a barrier, as was said earlier. And I think that one of the advantages that I had before launching was my experience in both state and federal government, because it certainly made me realize that there are a wide range of both services, products that both state government and federal government actually procure. And because I've had that experience, I made a very conscious decision in the very beginning of structuring my business that I did not want to actually seek out any external funding, which made it very, very challenging. Wow. And you have to have a great deal of patience, but you need to definitely, certainly emphasize your networking. And it's amazing how many resources you can find just by talking to other business people, talking to either current or former coworkers, and just really getting in to some of the opportunities that do exist both with federal and state government. It's a very complex system. So it definitely requires a great deal of patience and sort of researching what avenues that there might be within those structures. And so to date, I've never had to borrow money at all. So I'm very happy about that, but recognize that it is a field that you need to know. It is very complex, but can also be very rewarding as well.
And it sounds like networking is an important aspect of that.
It really is. I find more information out about things just by going to conferences, talking to people, sharing ideas. And people are very willing to share their ideas and certainly share their resources also. And it's amazing sometimes that when you're just having a casual conversation, particularly depending on what your product is or service is, that oftentimes, people stop and they think about that and say, well, wait a minute, we need that, or we're having this problem, and maybe what we could do is partner together. So even if nothing comes of it, the value is in the information that you acquire, but also potential business later on.
Yeah. Anyone else like to tackle this question, or shall we move on? All right, well, this is kind of looking back on it. Obviously, funding was important in the beginning and how you managed to do it, but what do you think that it took for you to be successful, to build your companies? And did any of you feel that you had to overcome any additional challenges like bias or unequal treatment? Because you hear about that with women-owned businesses.
This is Janet. I can say as a woman, African-American woman, and a person who is blind, I was really, really concerned about that as well, in terms of, being able to explain to people how you were going to, conduct business. I think that I was also very fortunate, though, in the connections, again, that I made previously. So people got to know who I was. And if I didn't know, the area of business, then I would go back and do my research. But again, it is sometimes very challenging to open those doors, and that there are, in fact, biases, certainly that I faced. But I think that over time, as people get to see your body of work, they get to experience, some of the outcomes and sharing your stories, that lessened, along the way. And so there's always this, storytelling, I think that we need to get better at, doing, that oftentimes we take for granted sometimes the work that we do, particularly as women, whether you're a mother, or you're taking care of elderly parents, we acquire skill sets along the way that we don't often remember, to take that credit for that and apply it in the skill sets that you're using in a business community.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Mary, how about you? Have you noticed anything?
Well, oh, for sure. I mean, I don't want to dominate the conversation here, but in tech is a little bit unique because you have to have a lot of money to get the developers to get to the level where you have credibility in selling the product. Like you need millions. So, it's kind of a unique challenge because I think some of the things that I can say that are helpful is there's kind of this thing in starting tech companies that's called the Valley of Despair. And it's a very real thing. So, that's where some of what everyone's saying, we apply our skills as women to get through that and to know that that is actually like a thing where you go through like a really hard time to start a tech company. And you have to be aware too that the people that you're going to sell to, you're going to be looking for early adopters. So you have to sort of know, okay, especially if it's new tech, you're not going to focus on laggards, like people that are not going to adopt new kinds of tech because they're going to slow you down. So there's skill sets that you need in terms of biases. As I said, venture capital for tech for women is less than 2%. And to do non-dilutive funding, I mean, that's what you want, non-dilutive, but it's you can go so far with women type grants, but not far enough. You pretty well. I did take on some dilutive investors, and I did find that their biases against women. They thought I was very nice, very passionate, but really had this, I think, in their defense, unconscious bias that because I was a female, I wasn't really suitable as CEO. You know, it was great that I had this idea, but you know, so I think it's getting less so, but I think there's almost sometimes unconscious biases that men have about female CEOs that we need to be aware of, and we need to continue to try to break down. I think, especially people that are, you know, men that are a little older and they maybe aren't even aware they have that, but just kind of assume, oh, well, you know, so it's important as female entrepreneurs. Just one last thing I'll say is that we really get to know our numbers and start to understand that at first, when I was pitching to investors, I really thought the cause was important because I'm so passionate about the cause, but I had to learn you have to focus more on your churn rate and your burn rate and all these things. And that's okay. That's just the way it is. Like, don't expect them to be investors to be interested in the cause, expect them to be interested in the numbers. So if you can prepare that. But again, going back to some of the earlier points people were making, that's why the valley of despair, because you don't have the numbers to start with, you know, and so it's kind of, I don't want to take up too much of the time, but those are some of the things that make it pretty tricky. I'm not going to lie, it's pretty tricky.
Okay, well, how about the rest of you?
I
Any
think
thoughts on
in a similar vein, it is grit, right? That's a key attribute you kind of have to have, because there will be ups and downs and obviously endless challenges, but that doesn't mean it's not rewarding. And eventually I think you can build stress tolerance over time. And so you gradually build that as you continue on your journey. I think, as far as bias, this is sort of a push for owning your own business, because then you're in charge of your own world, right? And so it's, I didn't feel it that much. And plus we had a lot of government contracts. So, and there are a lot of female leaders in our industry. So I think owning your own business is a way to take charge of your own world. I didn't have venture capitalists, so, I didn't have to deal with the bias there. So it's just sort of another reason to try and be an entrepreneur.
I guess I'll address like the barrier. The barrier that I saw was people already being in the space. And, if you said, oh, I'm interested in doing this, the comeback was always, oh, well, there's this one other person that's already doing that. Like there's not space enough for, Black people to tell their story. Only one person can tell the story. And then another thing as I entered the space was that there were other people telling our story. And so they had gotten in front of maybe the school districts or, in front of the library system. And they weren't people that looked like me, but they were, organizing or, building businesses around how this, our experiences are interpreted, into the community. So it's just very interesting and great people, I am definitely not knocking the work that they're doing, because I've met them and they do express the passion. But I find that, if this is going to be our story, then as we're coming in and telling that African-American history and African-American culture and sharing it, it would be best probably being interpreted from somebody that has, the background and the culture. So that's been the barrier, I guess, and more so the barrier is how do I then express that to the people, to the community, that this could maybe be somewhat problematic to someone coming into this space and trying to, start a business or, and trying to enter it, not have that type of barrier in place.
Right. Any other thoughts?
Yes, I would certainly reiterate what KESHIA was saying. I think you've got to be ready to, it takes a long time to sort of prove yourself in whatever space you're in. So definitely there's a reluctance to most people don't respond well to change. So if there's a new kid on the block, it can be challenging to some, not just competitors, but broader world out there. And I found it takes a long time for individuals, agencies, organizations to even be willing to give you a try. It's like, well, we always use this person or this company. You have to be really clear on what are you bringing to the table that's more or better or different or worth them changing maybe who they might select.
Yeah.
I found even talking with competitors, it's very much focusing on, well, there's enough for all of us. So it's trying to also come up with a camaraderie among competitors rather than just everybody clawing to get, the one contract or whatever. But working in that space it takes a lot of time, and it never, I'm very mindful of that now that, we've been around for 30 years, of trying to be mindful of other, particularly woman-owned businesses or small businesses that are starting up, that especially in interpretation, where it's people that are descendants of the stories that are being told, to be willing to back away and allow space and room for other people to step in. That's sort of the other end of, being in business a long time. But I think it's really important that people are willing to do that. Either through partnerships or just stepping back in certain situations.
Yeah, in my early years, I was frustrated that we weren't getting the opportunity to just bid and propose. So there was one instance where I called my state representative and just said, I just want to propose. I mean, you don't have to hand me the job. I just want the opportunity to propose. And it worked. He somehow, I was able to propose on that job, and we did win a little piece of it. So you gotta have that grit and doggedness, right, to go after it a little bit.
Well, let's follow up on that. This is the second time you've mentioned grit, Patty. And I'm curious with the rest of you too, when you reflect back on the establishment of your business and your kind of career journey, has there been a consistent theme like grit? I mean, is there something that has kept you going, that has motivated you, that seems to have always been a constant in your business journey? Stump the panel.
I know. You're processing.
This is Janet. I guess I'll start.
Okay.
With that. I think that for me, it is really started, and I think some of it is just related to confidence and just having that. You need to continue to have that confidence and in yourself. The decision to become an entrepreneur is not an easy one, and because you're relying solely on thinking about ways that you can be strategic and innovative and creative enough, to either develop a product or a service that is going to be, meaningful, that is going to be relevant, in time. And yet you also have to be agile. So I know that I've learned many times now, and I'm only 5 years in, to my business. So, I've learned though within that time period, but also from being in both state and federal government as well, is that agility is going to really be important in any work, that you do, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're an employee. Any type of leadership role, you need to be agile. And I think that theme has always been important to me. And even sometimes as challenging as being agile is, that sometimes you're going against the current in terms of what may be important at that time in the industry itself, and having a clear understanding. And again, doing your research and figuring out ways that you can be agile and make the service that you are trying to sell to someone else, make it applicable to what is going on at the current time, make it appealing. So I think that just that whole agility conversation and confidence, that you can, in fact, find ways to navigate through, because it does get sometimes challenging with keeping your confidence up if you continuously are not getting a bid, or you're continuously just having, to struggle with conversations around where is the right market? That can be, just challenging in itself. But I think staying innovative and being agile and understanding where that current is flowing is really important.
Oh, I know that sounds spot on. Anybody want to follow up to that? Another thought? Okay, well,
I was going to add, Margot,
okay.
As far as consistent themes, I think my consistent theme is always making sure that my community is represented, and we have activities and things to be engaged in that reflect us. So before I did my African American culture tours and experiences business, I actually had a Black singles network business. I was Black, I was single, I was new to the city. So this was a way that I could bring my community together and meet other people. But the one main point of doing it was, as I learned Cleveland, I made sure they learned Cleveland. So we always did different events and activities at different venues and experiences throughout the city. So I've kind of realized that is my theme, making sure that, people are exposed to not just what's happening in their backyard, but then even more specifically to what's happening in their backyard as it relates to your neighbors, the people that you share this community and space with.
Right. Well, one of the goals of this discussion is to encourage other women to take that giant step towards starting their own business or a nonprofit, if that is their dream. So I'm curious, how did you or do you use your success, the success you've built with your company over the years? How do you use that success or the privilege or your privilege to support or empower others?
I have joined, nonprofit boards, and one was local and SBA. So, helping them and the Economic Development Corporation. I'm also on the board of my alma mater and was able to mentor some students. And of course, my staff and coaching them. So and I'm in a Leadership Illinois group, and it's all women. And so we cheer each other on. So it's just, giving words of encouragement to many other women.
Okay.
For us, personally, just trying to mentor staff and provide opportunities. When you delegate something, don't just say, okay, you go do it instead of me because I'm too busy. It's actually delegating in a meaningful way and providing the tools for them to be able to succeed at whatever the task or the responsibility is. The other thing is, we've really expanded our partnership program with other smaller businesses. So, for example, we do a lot of work with Indigenous peoples. And so it's not just a question of making sure that we have a Native American on our team. It's way beyond that, to the point now that actually there are go-to partners that it's becoming a Dakota-led process. So we might be there to help with logistics, or because we've known the client and have had a relationship for many, many years to keep things running smoothly from the client's perspective. But when it comes to interpretation and developing exhibits and themes and stories, it's making sure that it is Dakota led. It's not just that there's a token person in the group. And that's a really big shift. And sometimes it's hard. Again, it's actually helping clients make that transition too, because it does lead to some really hard conversations, and it's trying to help our clients be able to have those conversations so that the outcome, whether it's an interpretive plan or an exhibit or a program of some kind, is so much more rooted and meaningful, both in terms of the story and the outcome, but also in terms of business opportunities. Because after years in business, we have a lot of access. And I don't want to become the block that, Betty and I have talked about, where you can't even get the opportunity to even bid on something. And I think as established businesses, that's a really important thing that we can do. in how we set up teams and work plans and so forth.
You know, I'm fortunate to be, amongst friends who are business owners, and a couple of my friends got together and we started a group called Black Women Work. And we're a space for, professionals and, other minority business owners to come together and just share their, feelings, experiences, seek out advice, share opportunities. So, that's just a good place where everybody can go and they know it's a safe space to ask their questions. And then from there, we branched out and now we do a grant. So each quarter, we provide $1,000 grant for local African-American woman-led businesses. And we have, a group of 10 other women that are a part of this in total. We each give $100 and we do these grants quarterly. And then, after we get the grant, we try to make sure we maintain contact with that business owner that we've awarded and even support them business-wise. So that's how we, we want to give back and make sure that others have an opportunity when needed.
Oh, interesting.
Wow, that's great.
Oh.
It is.
And-
I like that idea.
This is Janet. I think one of the things that helps me to stay, grounded, but also connected is, to always provide that feedback, to people and give them the opportunity to provide you with feedback. Because as hard as feedback can be, sometimes it also opens the door for other opportunities for improvement, but also other opportunities potentially for additional partnerships or service areas that you might not have considered previously. But I also think that it's important, and I try to use programs in colleges, for example, and even in high schools where we have the chance to promote their growth by raising awareness about the industry, that whatever industry it is that you're in, but also giving them the opportunity to sort of job shadow and do some very focused mentoring on the services or programs. But also, I think that it does open the doors to possibilities for youth who may not have ever seen themselves as being an entrepreneur because the bar is set pretty high. But I think that they learn, and I also learned tremendously from them as well, in terms of, what perceived concepts or certainly some of the barriers might be for them, particularly for youth who are culturally diverse. And I think that I try to stay connected to them because they can also be incredibly insightful in helping to understand how we are perceived as entrepreneurs and whether we're really hitting that mark in helping them also. So it's very meaningful and helpful to me to learn from them as well.
Okay. Mary, it looked like maybe you had something that you wanted to contribute.
Well, on that point, because Agents is still at the stage where we're still growing, I'm not really celebrating my laurels. We're still making it happen. We primarily, our team are really young because gaming, right? They're in their early 20s. So we try to really empower them as much as possible to be able to take leadership roles within our company so that they're actually, part of the team and empowered to their voice matters. So at this stage, we're sort of more focused on that. Eventually, I do hope to have more time in the future to be able to really support other women in business. The other thing I would like to say is just, I really agree with the panelists. I think that the determination is very important, sort of as a theme. And sometimes I've always had a philosophy that just when things seem darkest, the old saying, the night is darkest just before the dawn. You must never give up at those moments because sometimes things can just happen that can turn things around, just so you mustn't give up. That would be, I think also really believing in your cause can help people. I know for me, it's very much about the cause, just keeps you going.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would probably be, that's more linked to your previous question. What I would pinpoint is the thing to remember.
Okay, good. And just a reminder to our audience, we will be taking questions. And so if you have a question, for one of our panelists, just go ahead and enter it in the chat box, and we'll get your questions later at the end of the program. I have a couple more questions I'm going to ask. What leadership skills does it take to be successful in business? I guess more importantly, how did you go about gaining the leadership skills that you needed in order to be successful in business?
I think it's constant learning. You know, you are in having the humility to learn from others, and finding those coaches or other business owners or other people. I got an MBA, so I had a business training, and I would say that learning financial management, just like I think Mary said, is really key. So any education you can get on accounting and finance is going to be key to your success. So I would encourage everybody to learn that. That'll help you in your personal finance also. But, I studied emotional intelligence and leadership and community, crucial conversations. It's just endless. You will endlessly need to learn. And so you listen to podcasts while you're in the shower, or read when you can. I pulled over to the side of the road once, and a cop knocked on my window, and he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm taking notes from this podcast." So it's just, you just constantly learn. And I think someone else mentioned networking, and use that to learn from others, and that's how you're just gonna get better. Yeah.
I think to be a strong leader, you have to be very self-aware, and you have to be able to critique yourself, but also make sure that people that you're working with, that you can convey that you are open to constructive criticism from them. It's not just you're there telling everybody else where they did right and wrong, and that's hard. So I've tried to, like, if I go into a meeting with someone, we ask each other for feedback after the meeting of, did I hit the mark? Did we miss something? And so it becomes it's such an overused term, safe place, but people are set up to be able to know that it's okay to provide those critiques. And then also we have a mantra in our company of, you criticize in private and you compliment in public. And I think that's a very important thing for all of us, because none of us like to be criticized in any way, certainly not in public. And then it obviously has to be done delicately, even in private. So I think being self-aware and being open to be critiqued is actually quite important by colleagues, and certainly your employees.
Yeah.
Nothing, being adaptable. I mean, we go into these spaces, with our own ideas of what's going to work,
Right.
We may be pretty passionate about it, but you have to take the feedback, like Ann said, take the criticisms, constructive criticisms, and then be able to adapt your approach from there. I mean, I think that only also contributes to like your longevity. If you get stuck doing things one way, it's not going to meet your audience's need, and it's not going to have you be successful in the long run.
That's a real good point, because I think people can get stuck in their ways, and being flexible, I think, is real important.
Yeah.
Well, I think what I'd like to do is, unless anybody has anything else to say on this topic.
Well, I think for us, like having a team where as the leader, you don't feel that you're the best at everything. Like, you have people there, some of the leadership books you read, you want to surround yourself so you're everyone else in the room is smarter than you, but kind of along those lines, that you have people that you accept are better at things. And so you kind of go along as a team, that not everything, I don't fit in, at least in my philosophy, should go through the CEO, because then you become a bottleneck, especially in a dynamic tech, like not making yourself a bottleneck, but being part of the team and kind of deliberately having people around you that are better at other things than you are. But that's okay. Like, I think you got to be okay with that to be a good leader.
No, I think that's interesting. I hadn't done that. I kind of like to control everything.
Yeah, and especially I think as women, you know, if we age, like if we, well, for me in tech, that's impossible for me to even think I could ever be that, because you know, tech is changing so quickly and it's very much about 20-year-olds. So I've had to learn that pretty quickly, that's a terrible place for me to be, is in any way a bottleneck. So yeah, not just controlling certain pieces that I might be better at, but there's lots I'm not. So yeah.
Well, listen, one final question, and then we'll go to our question and answers. That I see that there are a few maybe in the chat box or in the Q&A. Just kind of succinctly as a final thought for all of you, what piece of advice would you offer women thinking of starting or running their own businesses? And Anne, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. Well, we've talked a lot about, you know, you have to really love what you do. You have to believe in yourself, especially for getting you through the down times. But one of the things I think is really critical is constantly monitoring the work-life balance. It can completely take over your world. I think that's really huge. Of how do you set parameters so that your business doesn't completely engulf everything about your personal life, unless that's what you choose, but do it very intentionally. So I think that's something you need to set from the very beginning. Sort of set your own principles of guiding principles for the business, and then monitor and evaluate yourself or with your family and so forth. I think it's very, very important, because it can be fun. It's a great ride, but it can really take a toll on family and personal relationships if you don't watch out carefully.
KESHIA, how about you?
I'll say you don't know what you don't know. So try to go out and seek information from those that are maybe doing something that you like the way they're doing it, you like their business, and you want to learn from them. You know, I have my MBA, but I'm an engineer, and I'm much better at blueprints than I am at spreadsheets. So I know that I need to find somebody that's going to manage that part of my business for me, because it's just not my strength. And going through the accelerator program for me was very helpful. Even though it was quick, it took you through those different phases of business development. You know, and I already had a lot of that in place, but going through it again just gave me the moment to go back with others, kind of viewing what I've already put in paper, you know, viewing that business plan and, you know, your vision statements and, you know, how to create these financial structures in your organization. So they could, you know, find something like that. And sometimes mentors are built into those programs too. So you have that person that maybe has a business that you're interested in learning about, that you can, you know, connect with, you know, more closely and ask those, you know, direct, intimate questions, you know, that you might be embarrassed to ask, you know, just another business person.
Mary, you had a reaction to KESHIA's statement. What rang true for you on that one?
Well, I just think, you know, she was saying sort of things along the lines of what I was talking about people having different strengths, and, you know, she's an engineer, so not as good as spreadsheets. So, but I think, you know, really paying attention to, like, reading a lot and paying attention to what experts who have been successful tell you. Because I think I've done a ton of reading, you know, and podcasts too, like things that open your eyes to things that you maybe didn't understand, and making sure that you take care of your health so you can stay strong. And like, even through my really darkest days, I made sure, like, I was at the gym, you know, I go to the gym regularly. I never once didn't go to the gym. And there was a few months where I really felt like not going to the gym, but I did. And I'm glad now I did. I still see, I've seen the same trainer for 17 years, but I mean that because I was so wound up, and, you know, those early days were pretty hard. So I agree with trying to not let it take over your whole life. Yeah, and making sure that you get out there and talk to as many people as you can. You cannot build a business in your own office. You have to be out meeting with people you know, really, like we try to meet with people across the country all the time. So I think that would be another really helpful thing. And making sure, you know, as women taking care of ourselves, we have a little bit of financial, you know, that we're willing to invest in ourselves, some personal financial support, because it's the finances that can really, so I know when things were really tough, I had to put in some money of my own. And if I hadn't had that, that would have been really hard. So it kind of, I think depending what you're attempting, you have to be willing to invest in yourself at time. Yeah. Especially in my sector. Yeah.
Janet, did you want to add something?
Sure. Yeah, growing up with a disability for me, you know, has always been, you know, interesting in that expectations, you know, so people will have certain expectations, and those expectations may be high expectations or they could be low expectations. But the one thing that I learned early on, because I've had that disability, is to never take the opportunity, you know, to prove somebody wrong. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes, you know, people will offer their opinion about either your skills or your ideas, you know, about your specific business, whether or not they think you can be successful. And so I always, you know, I listen, and I think that that's another piece of this is to try to be a good listener, because that's where you can learn, you know, the most, when you're listening to people. But also, don't necessarily buy into whatever, you know, advice or information people might give you that you feel the opposite about. So the naysayers, for example, you know, there's always more than one way, you know, to accomplish a goal.
Right.
But you need to have that goal first. And you need to talk to others who do believe in you, but also be a good listener, and also be willing to admit, you know, when you didn't succeed, or when you made a mistake. You have to work with that. You have to confront that, because that can just collapse your confidence over time. But also, people eventually read through it. And so I've always tried to own up to, you know, okay, what did I learn from this? And then let's make sure we do something differently in the future, so that we don't land in that place before. We're human.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with making a mistake. And oftentimes it can be your best learning tool.
Thank you. Betty, did you have anything that you wanted to add quickly?
Just to say that it is challenging. It's not easy, but it can lead to a rewarding, fulfilling, and adventurous life.
Great. Well put. Well, Heather, do we have some questions for our panelists?
We do. Thank you so much. That was an amazing way to spend an hour for me anyway. I have a couple of questions. One, is there a list somewhere, or an easy way to find a list of minority business enterprises or women business enterprises in the industry to encourage partnerships with these companies? Anybody know of a good resource?
Yeah, there is no one-stop shop anywhere. So usually the first place to start, each state, like a Department of Transportation, Department of Administration, they tend to be the ones that manage DBE programs. So that's one place to go. Sometimes professional organizations identify that category of business, but also you know, pick up the phone and call the organization as well. If you're looking for a specific type of service, like interpretation, or if it's museum work, one of the museum professional organizations, because if you get the right person at the organization that'll work with you and talk with you, they may be able to point you in the direction of individuals or companies that are women or minority owned and so forth. So that's what I would suggest.
And I wouldn't overlook, again, the value of your local public or college research library. They can be very good at knowing where to find. If such a list exists, they'll know where to find it.
And I would also suggest that don't be shy about contacting agencies and organizations and asking them, how do I get connected with you? What services does your agency or organization or business, procure? How do you become eligible to respond, to either a contract or a bidding process? Every state agency has a procurement process. Every state has an office where you can register yourself as a potential vendor. So get familiar with what services that states as well as federal governments actually procure on, because there's lots of opportunities. It's amazing how broad it is, the services that they look for. So definitely, look at your state government websites and look for procurement opportunities or procurement eligibility, so that you can become familiar with where those opportunities might be coming from in the process to get yourself registered.
Thank you, Janet. Unless anyone else has anything specific about that, we are at the top of the hour and I want to respect everybody's time. But I did want, and Mary, you sort of alluded to this, after a long day of work, what to do in those moments of self-doubt. And you talked about this, you just kind of go through, because a lot of times on the other side of it, it's going to be very rewarding. But does anybody else have any? And again, I understand if people have to hop off, this is recorded, so you can take a look at it after. But does anybody have any just quick advice? What to do in self-doubt?
Take a hot bubble bath.
Yes. I really think that's the time when you need to connect with someone else, because there is no way that someone else hasn't gone through those periods of time. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a leader in business, if you're, in whether, regardless if you're an entrepreneur or not, people go through those periods of times. And that's the best way to sort of check yourself, is to reach out to someone else to find out how to get by that moment, and don't take yourself too seriously. I think you need to have a good sense of humor when you're an entrepreneur, and look back at those times, but also be ready to also help somebody else when they're going through a difficult challenge.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any little tidbit of wisdom?
I go out to nature.
Oh, nature.
And I have horses, so I
Oh,
go to
yes.
horses.
Yes, I saw that in your bio. That's awesome.
I like what Janet said, because I think to be an entrepreneur, you have to seek out your community, whether at your support network. So whether it's close friends, it's a networking organization, it's your family, it's identifying those people that are there, through the good and bad times. And that's true, actually. It's not even an entrepreneur. Anybody needs that. We all need support at different times in our lives. So it's just, I think that's a huge part of, don't be afraid to seek help. You can't always be at the top of your game and excited and happy about everything that's going on. So,
and I found when I have self-doubt, it's usually about maybe one particular thing. And at that time, I'm ignoring all these other things that I may be, actually pretty good at. So I just try to, remove my focus on whatever that one thing is and think about something else, think about, oh, well, you're healthy, whatever those other things are.
Yes.
So I can at least, take emphasis off of whatever that self-doubt is at the moment.
Being grateful in the things that are going right.
Absolutely.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Practice gratitude.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think we should wrap up, just because I really want to respect folks' time. Thank you so much, Margot, and thank you, panelists. We will be in touch. We'll see some of you in Cleveland. Yay. And yeah, have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Just before we leave, I'd like to thank Mary again, on Agents of Discovery, for sponsoring this and for your commitment to the field of interpretation. And the same goes for so many of y'all that I've known over the years, and I really appreciate your support of NAI and of the field. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, it was my pleasure, and it was wonderful to meet all of you. You're all an inspiration. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Everyone have a
Take care,
great day.
everybody.
Glad to be
Come to
Bye.
Cleveland.
Bye.
Come to
Yes.
Cleveland.
Come to Cleveland.
Cleveland,
I
Cleveland
am here.
rocks.
Come to Cleveland.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.